A Song of Ice and Fire, A Storm of Swords by George R. Martin, a sleepy summary. Let this story drift over you the way snow drifts over the wall in the deep of night, soft and slow and endless. This is the tale of A Storm of Swords, the third book of the great saga of ice and fire, and though terrible things happen within it, we will walk through them gently, the way one walks through a dark house, carrying only a small candle, careful, unhurried, watching each shadow as it passes. Let us begin in the south, in the ruined and blood-soaked lands of the Riverlands, where the war between the great houses of Westeros still smoulders like embers that refuse to go fully cold. Here we find Jaime Lannister, the Golden Knight the small folk call the Kingslayer, a tall, handsome, once vain man with hair like beaten gold and a smile that used to open every door in the Seven Kingdoms. He was captured at the end of the last war and has spent long months in a dank cell, and now he is being marched, filthy and diminished, toward King's Landing as a prisoner exchange. Beside him rides his unlikely companion, Brienne of Tarth, called Brienne the Beauty by cruel men who mean the opposite, a woman as tall and broad-shouldered as any knight, with a plain, big-boned face she has long since stopped apologizing for. She wears armor because she wants, more than almost anything, to be a true knight, sworn now to escort James safely to King's Landing as a promise made to Catelyn Stark, the honorable, grief-worn Lady of Winterfell, who freed Jaime from his chains on the condition that he return her captured daughters. Their road together is long and dangerous, and slowly, unwillingly, something like respect grows between the cynical, self-loathing Jaime and the stubbornly honorable Brienne. But the road holds worse dangers than each other. They are seized by a band of sellswords called the Bloody Mummers, led by a cruel, vain mercenary named Vargo Hoat, a man with a wet, lisping voice and a taste for cruelty that curdles the stomach. Vargo Hoat, wanting to punish Jaime and humiliate the Lannisters who insulted him, has Jaime's sword hand cut from his wrist. For Jaime, who has spent his whole life defined by his skill with a blade, by his golden reputation, by the swagger that came from being the best swordsman in the realm, this is a wound deeper than any physical pain. It is the death of who he believed himself to be. He falls into despair, and it is Brienne, of all people, who talks him back from the edge, who refuses to let him surrender to bitterness entirely. They are taken to Harrenhal, a colossal, cursed castle of black melted stone, the largest fortress in Westeros, built long ago by a king so vain and cruel that dragons burned it half to slag, and it has been called unlucky ever since, its lords dying one after another in fire and blood. Harrenhal is currently held by Roose Bolton, a soft-spoken, pale-eyed lord whose voice never rises above a murmur, even when he says the most chilling things. A man loyal to Robb Stark for now, but with currents of his own ambition running silent and cold beneath his calm surface. Bolton treats Jaime with careful courtesy, has his wound tended, and eventually sends him onward toward King's Landing with Brienne, though their path will bend and twist further still, through a bear pit where Brienne is nearly killed by a starving bear and Jaime, one-handed and unarmed, leaps down to save her. an act that seals something quiet and important between them. Eventually, Jaime, urged by an unexpected mercy, sends Brienne off on her own quest to find Sansa Stark, the surviving daughter he half promised to protect, while he himself continues home to King's Landing, forever changed. Now let us drift northward, up along the muddy roads of the Riverlands, to find Arya Stark, the youngest of the story's wandering children, a skinny, stubborn, sharp-eyed girl who has spent the whole war so far disguised as a boy, running from one danger into the arms of another. She has fallen in with the Brotherhood without banners, a scattered band of outlaws led by Lord Beric Dondarrion, a once beautiful young lord now half ruined, his face scarred, his body having been killed and revived so many times by strange magic that he is barely a living man anymore, more a walking wound held together by purpose and the fire priest's prayers. Beside him is Thoros of Myr, a fat, red-robed priest of the Lord of Light who drinks too much and once cared only for tournaments and wine, but who has discovered, almost by accident, that his prayers can call the dead back for a little while. The Brotherhood fights in the king's name, or so they say, robbing from lords and soldiers of every banner, feeding small folk, hanging men they judge guilty of crimes against the common people. Arya is a captive among them, watched over uneasily, and it is here, in these damp forest camps, that she is reunited unexpectedly with Sandor Clegane, the Hound, a huge, terrifying man with half his face burned into a monstrous ruin from a childhood accident involving his own brother and a brazier of coals. The Hound has always frightened Arya, and yet there is something almost protective in how their paths keep crossing. The Brotherhood puts the Hound on trial for the murder of a butcher's boy, and Beric, in a moment of strange and sorrowful magic, duels him and dies, only to be revived once more by Thoros, his life stretched thinner each time like a candle burned too many times. The Hound is found not guilty and released, and later, when the Brotherhood decides to ransom Arya back to her family for gold, it is the Hound instead who takes her, meaning to sell her to her mother and brother himself. But the road to that reunion is cursed. Arya and the Hound arrive at a crossing called the Twins, a grim castle straddling the river on two sides connected by a huge stone bridge, home to House Frey, ruled by old Lord Walder Frey, a wizened, lecherous, endlessly resentful old man who has outlived 6 wives and fathered more children and grandchildren than anyone can count, and who has never forgiven the world for not respecting him as much as he believes he deserves. It is here at the Twins that one of the darkest nights in this whole story unfolds. Let us pause and breathe and speak gently of what came before it. Robb Stark, the young king in the north, a boy who became a war leader too fast, grey-eyed and auburn-haired like his mother, has been winning battles across the Riverlands with his direwolf Grey Wind always at his side, a beast as fierce and loyal as any soldier. To seal an alliance, Robb had once promised to marry one of Walder Frey's daughters. But in the chaos of war, far from home and grieving and human, Robb instead fell in love with and married Jane Westerling, a gentle young noblewoman who nursed him after a battle wound. This broken promise, though understandable in a boy's heart, is a mortal insult to proud, bitter Walder Frey, and it opens a wound that will never close. So Robb, along with his mother Catelyn, a woman who has lost so much already, a husband beheaded, daughters scattered, sons believed dead in the north, travels to the Twins to make peace with Walder Frey, to smooth over the broken vow with apologies and gold, and the marriage of Robb's uncle Edmure Tully to one of Frey's remaining daughters instead. The wedding feast begins with music and wine, laughter and toasts, everything wrapped in the false warmth of hospitality, which in this world is supposed to be sacred, a guest's safety guaranteed the moment they eat their host's bread and salt. But hospitality here is a lie. As the musicians in the hall begin to play a particular song, the doors are barred, and the Freys, in secret alliance with Roose Bolton and the Lannisters, turn on their guests. Robb's men are slaughtered where they stand. Grey Wind is killed with crossbows before he can defend his master. Robb himself is struck down, and in one of the cruelest details of the whole story, the sewn-on head of his direwolf is placed upon his headless body as a final mockery. Catelyn, seeing her son murdered in front of her, seizes Walder Frey's own wife as a hostage, and in her grief and fury, has nothing left to bargain with. She is stabbed, and her throat is cut, and she falls into the river, gone. This slaughter becomes known across the realm as the Red Wedding, and it is one of the most devastating betrayals in the whole history of this story, ending the War of the Five Kings in the north not through victory, but through treachery and blood. And yet, gently now, softly, this is not quite the end of Catelyn Stark. Days later, her body is found floating in the river by the Brotherhood without banners, and Beric Dondarrion, who has died and been returned to life so many times, gives up the last of his own borrowed life to bring her back one final time. But what returns is not quite Catelyn as she was. Her face is grey and ruined by the water, her throat a permanent open wound, her voice a whisper, her heart consumed entirely by vengeance. The men who once called her Beric's Leda now flinch from her. She becomes known, quietly and fearfully, as Lady Stoneheart, and she leads the Brotherhood now toward one single purpose, killing every Frey and Bolton she can find. It is in her cold, grasping hands that Arya's story pauses at the very end of this book, with the Hound lying wounded nearby and Arya having slipped away, boarding a ship bound across the narrow sea, her list of names to kill growing longer, her heart growing harder. Let us turn now softly towards Sansa Stark, the older of the Stark daughters, a girl who once dreamed of songs and knights and gallant princes, and who has learned instead, trapped for years now in King's Landing, that the real world rewards silence and careful smiles far more than honesty. Sansa is beautiful, red-haired, blue-eyed, and utterly a prisoner of the Lannisters, watched at all times, forced to smile at the boy King Joffrey who once had her father executed. In this book her cage tightens further. She is married, against her wishes and without warning until the very last moment, to Tyrion Lannister. Tyrion is the youngest child of Lord Tywin Lannister, a dwarf, clever and quick-tongued, with mismatched eyes, one green and one black, and a nose that was partly cut away in the battle at King's Landing at the end of the last book. leaving a scar across his face that will never fully heal. Tyrion did not want this marriage any more than Sansa did. He understands with perfect clarity that his father has arranged it purely as a political tool to bind Winterfell's claim to House Lannister. But he treats Sansa with more decency and restraint than anyone in that court has shown her in a long while. On their wedding night, he refuses to consummate the marriage against her will, a small mercy in a world that has offered her almost none, though it earns him no thanks from his own furious father. Sansa's true refuge, strange as it seems, becomes Peter Baelish, called Littlefinger, a small, sharp-featured, silver-tongued lord who rose from nothing to become master of coin, and one of the most dangerous manipulators in the Seven Kingdoms. A man who has loved Sansa's mother Catelyn since childhood, and who now looks at Sansa with an unsettling tenderness that is not quite fatherly. When the political winds shift violently, and they do, spectacularly, Littlefinger arranges Sansa's secret escape from King's Landing, spiriting her away by boat, disguising her, renaming her, and delivering her at last to the Eyrie, a castle of pale white stone perched at a dizzying height atop a mountain called the Giant's Lance, reachable only by a narrow, twisting mountain path, a place of thin air and endless wind. There's Sansa's aunt, Laesa Arryn, a fragile, jealous, unstable woman who has doted obsessively on her sickly young son Robert, welcomes Littlefinger with open arms, for she has secretly loved him for years and believes he has finally come to marry her. But that reunion turns to horror quickly. In a fit of jealous rage, believing Littlefinger desires Sansa instead of her, Laesa nearly throws Sansa through the moon door, a door in the floor of the high hall of the Eyrie that opens onto a sickening drop of hundreds of feet, traditionally used to execute criminals by tossing them into the sky. Littlefinger arrives just in time, speaks softly, calms his wife's fury, and then, in one smooth, quiet motion, pushes Laesa herself through the moon door instead, and she falls silently away into the clouds below. He tells the men of the Eyrie that she fell trying to catch a bird, and no one dares question him. Sansa, horrified and complicit in the lie by her silence, remains at the Eyrie under Littlefinger's protection, and under his growing, quiet obsession, learning to be someone else entirely, someone he begins to reshape and call his own. Now let us drift back to King's Landing itself, that vast, sprawling capital city built on 7 hills beside Blackwater Bay, its skyline crowned by the Red Keep, a great fortress of pale red stone with round towers and a dragon skull-lined throne room, where the monstrous, twisted iron throne, forged of 1,000 swords surrendered by defeated enemies long ago, all its edges still sharp enough to cut a careless king, sits waiting for whoever is strong enough or cruel enough to hold it. On that throne sits Joffrey Baratheon, 13 years old, golden-haired, beautiful to look at and rotten within, a boy who delights in cruelty the way other children delight in games, who is, though almost no one in the realm knows it, not truly a Baratheon at all, but the product of the secret, forbidden love between his mother Queen Cersei and her twin brother Jaime. Tyrion, after the great battle at the end of the last book, briefly served as Hand of the King and saved the city from destruction, only to be stripped of credit, power, and gratitude by his own father Tywin, who returned to the city as its true ruler in all but name. Lord Tywin Lannister is one of the most formidable men in this story, a tall, imposing, utterly controlled lord with pale green eyes and golden hair going grey. A man who has spent his whole life building House Lannister into the most powerful family in Westeros, and who feels nothing but cold disappointment toward his dwarf son. Tywin makes Tyrion Master of Coin, a post with responsibility, but stripped of the true influence Tyrion briefly held, and forces upon him the marriage to Sansa that neither of them wanted. The great event of this thread of the story is Joffrey's own wedding, his marriage to Margaery Tyrell, a lovely, ambitious, endlessly charming young woman from the rich, fertile lands of Highgarden in the south, a rose-growing region ruled by her family, the Tyrells, who bring soldiers and grain to the Lannister cause, and now seek to bind their fortunes to the crown itself. The wedding feast is a spectacle of enormous extravagance, dozens of courses, entertainers, jesters, forced marriages within marriages of pomp, and it ends, in front of hundreds of witnesses, with Joffrey suddenly choking, his face turning purple, blood and froth at his lips, clawing at his own throat as he collapses and dies at the high table on his own wedding day. It becomes known ever after as the Purple Wedding. In the chaos and grief that follows, suspicion falls immediately and viciously upon Tyrion, who had been standing near the Boy King's wine cup, and who had never once hidden his contempt for Joffrey's cruelty. He is arrested and imprisoned in a black cell beneath the red keep to await trial for regicide and kinslaying, even as his own sister Cersei, wild with grief and fury, demands his death without evidence. Into this dark moment steps a new and vivid figure, Prince Oberyn Martell of Dorne, called the Red Viper, a lean, dangerous, strikingly handsome man with dark hair and darker eyes, sun-browned skin, and a reputation across the Seven Kingdoms for poison, pleasure, and a very long memory for old grudges. He has come to King's Landing carrying decades of buried fury, for his sister Elia Martell, once married into House Targaryen, was raped and murdered along with her children during the sack of King's Landing years ago, and Oberyn has never forgiven the Lannisters for it. When Tyrion, desperate and cornered, demands a trial by combat rather than face a judgment he knows is rigged against him, Oberyn steps forward to be his champion, hoping that in defeating Tywin's own chosen champion, he might finally extract a confession about his sister's deaths. That chosen champion is Sir Gregor Clegane, called the Mountain That Rides, the Hound's own monstrous older brother, a man of almost inhuman size and brutal strength, famous, infamous, for having been the one who actually killed Elia Martell and her children during that same terrible sack of the city long ago. The duel between Oberyn's swift, poison-tipped spear and Gregor's crushing brute strength is one of the most vividly remembered scenes in the whole saga. Oberyn dances circles around the giant, wounding him again and again with a blade dipped in deadly poison. And for one breathless, hopeful moment, it seems the Red Viper will win, that justice long delayed might finally arrive. But Oberyn cannot resist demanding his confession aloud, taunting the dying Gregor, and in that fatal pause the enormous, poisoned, dying mountain lunges forward with his last strength, crushes Oberyn's skull between his massive hands, and confesses to raping and murdering Elia with his final breaths before collapsing himself, mortally poisoned, though it takes him agonizing days to actually die. With his champion slain, Tyrion is condemned to death. But his older brother Jaime, newly returned and horrified at what has become of his family, arranges his escape in secret, helped by Varys, the eunuch spymaster, a soft, bald, powdered man who speaks in riddles and always seems to know everything happening in every corner of the Seven Kingdoms, and who has his own long, hidden reasons for wanting the realm's chaos to end. Before Tyrion flees the city forever, he learns a devastating truth. She, the woman he loved, a sellsword's whore he had brought to the city and cared for despite everything, has betrayed him and testified against him at his trial. And worse, he finds her now in his own father's bed. In a fury of grief and betrayal, he strangles her, and then he goes to confront Tywin himself, finding the old lord on the privy, and shoots him dead with a crossbow, the final, terrible collapse of a family already torn apart from within. Tyrion flees across the narrow sea in a crate, smuggled out by Varys, leaving Westeros behind, his face and his family both ruined. Now gently, let us travel far across the narrow sea, to the hot golden lands of Essos, where Daenerys Targaryen is walking her own long road. Daenerys is young, silver-haired, violet-eyed, the last true-blooded heir of the fallen Targaryen dynasty that once ruled Westeros with dragons, and she herself now has 3 dragons of her own, small but growing, hatched from stone eggs by fire and grief at the end of the first book. Drogon, Regal, and Viserion, named for family she has lost. She arrives at Astapor, a slave city built of red brick, famous and feared for producing the Unsullied, an army of eunuch slave soldiers trained from childhood to feel no fear, no pain, no mercy, utterly obedient. Daenerys, horrified by slavery yet needing an army, strikes a bargain. She trades one of her dragons for the entire army of Unsullied and the masters who trained them. And then, once the deal is done, commands her dragon to turn its fire upon the slave masters themselves, frees every slave in the city, and marches on toward the next slaving city with an army that now serves her not out of fear, but out of loyalty freely given. At her side through all this walks Ser Jorah Mormont, an older, weathered, exiled knight who has loved Daenerys quietly and hopelessly for a long time, and Missandei, a gentle, brilliant young translator freed from Astapor who becomes one of Daenerys's most trusted companions, and Grey Worm, the newly freed commander of the Unsullied, a man of few words and unshakable loyalty. Daenerys goes on to conquer Yunkai, another slaving city, and finally Marianne, the largest of the three great slaving cities, a vast metropolis of stepped pyramids where she finally decides, rather than sailing onward toward Westeros as she has always planned, to stay and try to actually rule, to learn what it means to govern rather than simply conquer, closing this chapter of her story seated uneasily upon a throne of her own making, dragons growing restless around her. A queen without a kingdom, yet trying to become one worth having. Let us go now to the cold, at last, up to the very edge of the known world, to the wall, an immense structure of ice, 700 feet high, stretching hundreds of miles across the top of the continent, built thousands of years ago to hold back whatever dwells in the frozen wilderness beyond. Here the Night's Watch keeps its ancient vigil, a brotherhood of criminals, bastards, and unwanted sons sworn to give up family, love, and land to guard the realms of men from dangers most of Westeros no longer believes are real. Jon Snow, the bastard son of the beheaded Lord Eddard Stark, dark-haired and solemn, has spent much of the previous book undercover among the wildlings, the free folk who live beyond the wall, distrustful of the southern kingdoms, gathering now under a remarkable leader named Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall, a former Night's Watch brother himself who deserted long ago to unite the scattered wildling clans against a much greater threat. The others, ancient, icy inhuman beings who bring the dead back as mindless wights, and whose true purpose is only beginning to become clear. Jon has fallen in love, unexpectedly and deeply, with Ygritte, a fierce, freckled young wildling spearwife with fire-colored hair, sharp opinions, and a habit of teasing Jon for knowing nothing, who becomes both his lover and in the end, his heartbreak. Jon's loyalty is torn brutally in two. Ordered to prove himself to the wildlings by his former captain Corin Halfhand, a grim, quiet ranger who sacrifices himself deliberately in single combat, so that Jon will be forced to kill him and thereby earn the wildlings' trust. Jon infiltrates their ranks fully, only to slip away later when the wildling army finally moves to attack the wall itself, unable in the end to betray his true brothers of the Night's Watch. Ygritte pursues him and in a small, sorrowful skirmish shoots him with arrows before being fatally wounded herself. She dies in his arms beside a weirwood tree, her last words gentle and forgiving, telling him he knows nothing, one final time, softly, without anger. While Jon has been beyond the wall, terrible things have happened behind it too. A group of Night's Watch rangers, mutinous, half-starving and terrified after encountering the others firsthand, turn on their own commander at a bleak, cruel outpost called Craster's Keep, home to a wildling man named Craster who has survived for years by giving his own newborn sons to the others in the woods as tribute and marrying his own daughters in turn. The mutineers murder Craster and their own Lord Commander, and the remaining loyal men of the Night's Watch flee back toward the wall in horror. Jon arrives back at Castle Black, the Night's Watch's main fortress, just in time for a massive, desperate battle. The wildling army led by Mance Rayder assaults the wall itself, in overwhelming numbers, using giants and mammoths and sheer desperate force, while the Night's Watch, vastly outnumbered, defends with everything they have. Salvation arrives unexpectedly in the form of King Stannis Baratheon, a grim, humorless, deeply principled claimant to the Iron Throne, thin-lipped and hard-eyed, who has allied himself with a foreign fire priestess named Melisandre, a beautiful, ageless red-robed woman who worships a god of flame and shadow, and who has convinced Stannis that he is the prophesied hero destined to save the world from the coming darkness. Stannis's forces crush the wildling assault and capture Mance Rayder himself, and in the aftermath, the surviving brothers of the Night's Watch, grateful and impressed by Jon's courage and clear-headedness through it all, elect him as their new Lord Commander, an extraordinary honor for a bastard boy who was, not so very long ago, the least respected recruit at the Wall. Let us drift, finally, to two smaller, quieter threads, gentle as the last embers of a fire before sleep. Far to the north, beyond even the Wall now, young Bran Stark, crippled since a fall in the very first book, unable to walk, though he can run and hunt in his dreams through the mind of his direwolf Summer, travels through the haunted forest with his loyal, simple, gigantic servant Hoda, who can say only that one word, and with Jojen and Mira Reed, two mysterious siblings from the Swampy Neck who possess strange gifts of foresight and instinct. They are searching for a figure Bran has seen in visions, a being called the Three-Eyed Crow, said to dwell far beyond the Wall in a place of ancient magic. And their small, cold, dangerous journey ends this book perched at the very edge of known lands, walking toward answers that will not come until later chapters of this long, long story. And so the great tapestry of this book draws itself closed, thread by thread, the way a fire slowly banks down to coals at the end of a long night. A boy king lies dead at his own wedding feast. A king in the north lies murdered at what should have been a celebration of peace, his mother beside him, though she does not, in the end, entirely stay dead. She returns instead as something colder and sadder, a mother made of grief and vengeance both. A dwarf lord, betrayed by nearly everyone he loved, kills his own father and disappears into exile. A silver-haired queen sits uneasily upon a foreign throne, surrounded by dragons she does not yet fully understand. A bastard boy becomes the leader of the order that once thought so little of him. A crippled boy walks on, in dreams if nowhere else, toward a destiny none of them can see clearly yet. But hush now, there are still a few more threads to gather up before we let the fire die down completely. A few more small, sad, quiet stories that deserve to be told before sleep takes us. Let us speak softly of Theon Greyjoy, for his story in this book is the darkest and most pitiable of them all. Theon was once a proud, arrogant young lord, raised as a ward at Winterfell alongside the Stark children after his own family's rebellion was crushed, always a little bitter, always a little too eager to prove his worth. At the end of the last book, he betrayed the Starks who raised him, seized Winterfell for his own cold, seafaring family, the Greyjoys of the Iron Islands, a hard, salt-bitten people who worship a drowned god and believe that what is dead may never die, and it cost him everything. Winterfell was burned and lost, and Theon was captured not by his enemies in open battle, but by his own father's bannerman, a small, soft-spoken, deeply disturbed young man named Ramsay Snow, the bastard son of Roose Bolton, whom we have already met once, pale-eyed and murmuring at Harrenhal. Ramsay takes Theon back to his family seat, a grim fortress called the Dreadfort, and there, patiently, methodically, over long and unbearable months, he tortures him, flaying strips of his skin, cutting away fingers and toes, breaking him down piece by piece, not merely in body, but entirely in spirit, until the proud young Lord Theon Greyjoy disappears completely, replaced by a broken, cringing, self-hating creature who no longer even remembers to answer to his own name. Ramsay renames him Reek, after a foul-smelling old servant, and by the end of this story, that is the only name the poor creature will answer to, flinching at loud noises, terrified of his own shadow, his sense of self ground down to almost nothing. It is one of the quietest, cruelest horrors in the whole saga, made all the more terrible for how little of it happens on the page directly. We mostly see its aftermath, a broken man mumbling his own new hated name to himself in the dark. Let us turn to gentler things now, though still touched with sorrow, and speak of Samwell Tarly, a fat, timid, bookish young man of the Night's Watch, the very opposite of the fierce warrior his own father always wanted, who found in Jon Snow the first true friend of his life. Sam was there at Craster's Keep, that grim wildling homestead we spoke of earlier, and he was there too when the Black brothers encountered whites and others in the haunted forest beyond the wall. And in one moment of pure desperate courage that surprised even himself, he managed to kill one of the others with a dagger made of dragonglass, discovering by accident one of the only known ways to destroy such creatures. Sam also carries a heavy secret and a heavier burden south with him. Gilly, one of Craster's own daughter-wives, a frightened, gentle young wildling woman who begged Sam to help her escape her father's terrible home before her newborn son could be given to the woods, as tribute the way all of Craster's sons before him had been. Sam smuggles Gilly and her baby south to safety, protecting them through cold and danger with a courage that would have astonished the boy he used to be. And by the book's end, he has been sent onward, entrusted with a mission to the Citadel in Oldtown to study and become a maester, carrying knowledge about the others that the wider world desperately needs to hear. And let us not forget Sir Davos Seaworth, called the Onion Knight, a humble, weathered smuggler turned knight, missing several fingers from an old punishment, a man of plain good sense and quiet loyalty who serves King Stannis not out of ambition, but out of genuine, old-fashioned honor. Davos distrusts Melisandre and her Red God deeply, blaming her fire magic for dark deeds done in Stannis's name. And for much of this book, he is imprisoned by his own king for daring to speak against her. Yet it is Davos, released at the crucial hour, who helps convince Stannis to march his forces to the wall to fight the wildling host rather than pursue his own claim to the throne alone, an act that turns out to save the Night's Watch, and in its own quiet way, all the 7 kingdoms besides. Let us picture, too, for a moment, the great sprawl of King's Landing itself, since we have spent so much time within its walls without ever quite describing it. Imagine a vast, crowded city climbing over 7 hills above a wide, dark bay, its streets narrow and winding and smelling of fish and smoke and unwashed thousands, its wealthier quarters gleaming with marble and its poorer ones crumbling into mud. The whole city crowned at its highest point by the red keep, pale rose-colored stone walls and round battlements bristling with spikes, and within it the cavernous throne room where that cruel iron chair of 1,000 swords waits. Dark and ugly beneath 100 banners, for whoever is strong enough to survive sitting upon it. It is a city of whispered secrets and painted smiles, where Varys the eunuch spymaster keeps his little birds, informants scattered through every household, every brothel, every tavern, and where Grand Maester Pycelle, an old, doddering, secretly cunning healer with a long white beard, pretends feebleness while quietly serving whichever master seems likely to win. Let us drift once more to Winterfell, too, though only in memory now, for the castle itself lies in ruins through most of this book. Its great grey walls scorched black, its godswood, a quiet grove of ancient trees with a heart tree at its centre, a pale weirwood with a carved red face that watches over the old gods of the north, left standing untouched, as it always somehow is, even amid fire and ruin. Winterfell was once a warm, sprawling castle of grey stone, with hot springs running beneath its walls to keep its halls warm even in the coldest winters, home to House Stark for thousands of years, its sigil a grey direwolf on a field of white, its words an old and simple warning: winter is coming. To see it burned, its towers toppled, its people scattered, is one of the quiet, aching sorrows that hums beneath every Stark storyline in this book, a reminder of just how much has already been lost, and how much further there still is yet to fall. Let us think, too, once more and gently, of small Rickon Stark, the youngest of all the Stark children, only a little boy, who does not appear often in this part of the story, but who has been sent into hiding on a remote, wind-scoured island called Skagos with the wildling woman Osha and shaggy dog, his own black, fierce, half-feral direwolf, tucked away safely out of sight of the wars raging across the mainland. A small, quiet thread left dangling, waiting, like so much else in this story, for a later telling. And let us remember, before we finally let this story rest, the direwolves themselves, 6 great silver-eyed wolf pups found orphaned in the snow at the very start of this whole saga, one given to each of the Stark children as a kind of living omen. Grey Wind, Robb's wolf, dies alongside his master at the Red Wedding, cut down by crossbows before he can even reach the hall. Lady Sansa's gentle wolf was killed long ago, back in the first book, and Sansa has felt the ache of that loss every day since, a small grief buried beneath so many larger ones. Nymeria, Arya's wolf, was driven away by Arya herself for her own safety years ago, and now runs wild and free somewhere in the Riverlands, leading her own pack, glimpsed only rarely, a shadow of teeth and fur in the deep woods. Summer stays close to Bran through all his cold travels north of the Wall, sharing dreams and hunts with him the way an old friend shares silence. Shaggy Dog, wild and unbroken, stays with Rickon on his lonely island. And Ghost, John's pale, red-eyed, silent white wolf, waits for him always at Castle Black, patient and watchful, the last quiet comfort of a boy who has lost almost everyone else he loved this year. So many losses, so many small candles guttering out one by one across this long, cold story. A boy king poisoned at his wedding feast, a young king murdered at what should have been a peace, a proud lord's hand and pride both cut away, a proud lord's mind and name both stripped from him in a cold northern dungeon, a mother who does not stay properly dead, a father who dies upon a privy at his own son's hand, a red-headed wildling girl who dies gently, without anger, beneath a weirwood tree. And yet, amid all this loss, small stubborn threads of hope keep weaving themselves onward too. A bastard boy raised to command, a broken girl finding unlikely kindness from a dwarf, and later, a strange and dangerous protector in the mountains. A silver queen learning, slowly and imperfectly, what it truly means to rule rather than simply conquer. A crippled boy pressing onward through the snow toward answers only he can see. A fat, frightened boy discovering, when it mattered most, that he was braver than he ever believed. Winter, as it has been promised since the very first page of this long saga, is still coming, closer now than ever, its cold breath already felt at the wall, in the dead things stirring in the deep woods, in the long, unnatural summer finally beginning, at last, to end. But for now, here, at the close of this telling, let the swords rest a while, let the ravens stop flying, let the snow settle soft and white and silent over all these tired, broken, hopeful people, over burned castles and drowned queens and broken boys and grieving wolves alike, and let this story, like a tired child finally worn out from playing, close its eyes and sleep. In the end, this sleepy summary, with its relaxing tone and warm glow, is not meant to replace something. It is meant to honor and point toward a much larger light. It is offered with care and with the genuine hope that something in tonight's listening finds its way into you as an invitation. The whole book is waiting. The real depth lives there, in every word they chose and every story they told and every quiet idea they let breathe across a full page. Let this be the beginning of something you carry forward in the light of an ordinary tomorrow. And if this lamp has helped you in some way, a like keeps it burning for someone else who might need it too.